Sorry to tell you, it's not even what's that? No, deer hunter. A deer hunter story, yeah.
I'm going to call to order the Monday, November 17th meeting. This is the Committee of the Whole for the City of Verona. We will have the roll call. Mr. Burns, if you would, please.
Alderperson Linder.
Here.
Alderperson Ures.
Here.
Alderperson Touche.
Present.
Alderperson Reekie.
Here.
Mayor Hokumer.
Here.
Alderperson McGilvery.
Here.
Alderperson Doyle.
Here.
Alderperson Diaz.
Here.
Alderperson Steiner.
Here.
We have everyone here. Thank you for that. Next, the minutes of the November 10th meeting of the Committee of the Whole were included with your agenda. What is your pleasure? We have a motion by Ms. Reekie. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Ures. Were there any corrections, additions, corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. And we are on agenda item number 5, which is 2015 city budget and proposed budget amendments. Mr. Burns, if you would, please.
Yeah, thank you. We don't have a presentation planned for this evening on the budget. We'd provided the presentation last week with the Committee of the Whole. Staff is available if there are any questions on the budget. As far as amendments, we had 2 amendments that were submitted by council members, by Alderperson Diaz. Those were sent out to the council on Friday. And then there was a 3rd budget amendment that's a suggestion from staff, which is a technical item related to projected benefit levels in the administration budget with the recently filled deputy clerk position. We're anticipating that position will that the person filling that position will likely be taking single level health insurance benefits. So the proposed amendment would be to reduce the administration budget by $10,116, conditional on that level being chosen, and we're hoping to confirm that prior to council action on the budget next week.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burns, do you want to handle the amendments, at least the first one that's coming from the city staff?
Sure. Would you like to provide additional information on it, just kind of walking through, or?
Not additional information, but I think for the benefit of those that might be watching, so that they know what the amendments are.
Sure, yeah. Perhaps it'd be beneficial if I just walk through briefly the 3 amendments, and then I can comment
Sure.
a little bit more on the one from staff.
Sure.
So the first amendment submitted by Alderperson Diaz would remove the $35,000 of professional services in the administration budget that's planned for the contracting of economic development services, and use those funds towards offsetting the city's mill and overlay program, which is a street program, in 2015. The net impact of that amendment would be to have no change in the city's property tax levy and redirect those funds from the administration operating budget to our capital budget, applying capital levy towards the mill and overlay project in lieu or reducing the borrowing by an equivalent amount. Amendment number 2, submitted by Alderperson Diaz, would be to increase the city's capital levy compared to the recommended budget by $45,000 in 2015, and to use those funds to, again, reduce the amount of borrowing planned for the streets mill and overlay project in 2015, substituting that $45,000 of capital levy. The projection is that would change the city portion of the tax rate by about 3 cents, which would reduce the projected impact of the city portion of the tax rate from a minus 1% compared to the prior year to approximately a minus 0.6%. And then the 3rd amendment, which is the suggestion from staff, would reduce the administration personnel budget by $10,116 based on anticipated health insurance benefit levels. The impact of that amendment would be to reduce the expenditures and the property tax levy by the $10,116.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. With that, we are open for comments, questions on the amendments. Mr. Diaz?
I had a quick question about the staff amendment. Is this, because my understanding is it'll have to come from the council to officially make an amendment. Will we make that amendment today, or will we do that on budget night?
It was our intent that we would take action on the amendments tonight as a recommendation to the council for next week, Monday.
Okay, so nobody would have to move to adopt the amendment or to recommend adopting the amendment tonight from the staff, or do we have to?
Not from the, I think as a package, we probably could, or if we want to do them independently, but yes, on each one of the three amendments, we should take action.
Okay.
Questions, comments on the amendments? Mr. Diaz?
I guess I just want to talk about both the amendments that I submitted, and just say I like the idea of economic development. Obviously, that was one of the main reasons I want to be on the council at all, and why I want to put in all the work. But I guess I just don't feel consultants are the right way to handle it. I wasn't totally happy with the downtown planning process, although I did feel like we came out with a pretty decent plan. I thought the process could have been better, and I don't want to surrender anything like that to a consultant who's might be very good, but they don't live here, they're not staff, they don't have the kind of oversight that city staff does. And then of course the second part of that amendment and the one after that is about borrowing less money. I've seen the plans. I saw the same report from Moody's that everyone else did, and it looks like we're fine. We're borrowing a decent amount of money, but it's within state law, and it's not wasteful. It's for roads and the fire department and things that people use. However, that being said, we have the money right now to be able to not borrow as much money, and I think we all know, like from personal finances, like anytime you borrow money, you have to pay interest, and so it's not just $45,000. It's $45,000 plus interest. And so I feel like every kind of incremental change, every kind of small bit we cannot borrow now will be in better financial shape in the future. Because we can't keep relying on borrowing money. We can't keep relying on using money from the fund balance. And I know there's a plan that will kind of sort it out and get us off of the kind of path that we're on now. And it looks like a good plan, but that it doesn't take into account unforeseen things, because no plan can take into account unforeseen things. And I would just rather start the process now. And so that's why I propose these two amendments.
Comments, questions from the council? Mr. Touche?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On your second amendment, adjusting the mill rate, you made the comment, we have the money now. We don't have any money, right? We can choose to hold the mill rate the same and spend it as we like, or reduce the mill rate, but it's money we don't have. I mean, I just don't see it the same way you do. If we decide not to borrow more next year, then we ask people to pay in more. But it's really, what are we paying in, and not money we have. So as far as changing the mill rate, I'm just not comfortable with it. I very much like the mill rate, what the budget committee has put together.
Other questions or comments, Mr. Diaz?
I totally understand what you're saying, but I guess I just point out two things. One, I mean, we're still reducing the mill rate, just not as much. And of course, by borrowing money, we're going to give people money back, and then the taxpayers are going to have to pay on that debt, no matter what happens in the future. So that's just something. It's like I said, it's the way I do my personal finances. I don't try to take out. I try to reduce the amount of debt that I owe as much as possible. And I feel like this is the kind of, it's definitely not as exciting as reducing the mill rate from what it was last year. But I feel like it's more responsible if a little bit more boring.
Other comments, questions from the council? And just, Ms. Reiki, go ahead.
Okay, I guess I'm agree with Alder Diaz that I'm not really sure that a person coming in from the outside would necessarily be fully invested in improving our city long term. I'm not convinced that that's the case, and but although I really do want to keep my goal of making sure our downtown is improved, and that would be a way to potentially make that happen. I'm just not sure that's the best, most responsible way to spend that money. Also, I think the upcoming street terracing improvements downtown should have the effect of kind of increasing the general appeal for potential businesses to want to move to Verona. So I'm sort of hoping that that might have a positive effect. And Yeah, I also agree with the other amendment about reducing debt since we can.
Mr. Yers?
You know, I too have been a strong proponent of the downtown and want to see those things succeed. One question I have is how would taking this money away and taking the consultants away, how would that change our staff's number of work hours on these projects? And would we be able to move as quickly on some of these projects?
Mr. Burns, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, the proposal that was in the originally recommended budget was for a staff position, position of associate planner, and the thought process was that by creating that position, that would allow that position to focus on some of the current and project planning tasks and free up additional time for the city planner to focus on economic development activities and possibly provide some additional support for my position as well. The recommendation from the Finance Committee was to remove that position and put in consulting funds. I think one of the options, if we included the funds for contracting or consulted funds, would be rather than hire somebody to do a plan, because I don't think anyone feels that we need another plan at this point, but try to look for an arrangement where we could look for a professional on a consulting or contractual basis who could come in and do some ongoing activities for us related to economic development. Exactly what those are have not been fleshed out yet at this point, wanting to see if this goes forward in the budget. But I have had a conversation with at least one organization that does contracted economic development services, where they have individuals that provide basically staff support for Community Development Authority and helping to do things like business recruitment or helping develop and administer programs, in this case through a Community Development Authority. So I think that's the type of program we're looking at. If there are not the funds in the budget to do that, I think that as staff we will prioritize and use the staff resources we have most effectively and based on the direction, but without a position or the contracted services that limits how much additional we'd be able to do beyond what we're doing now.
Mr. Yers?
You know, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I mean, I think Mr. Diaz and I agree on the downtown, and we agree that we want things to move forward. However, I will be voting no on this amendment tonight because I want to make sure that we have the staff and the hours available to make sure that we're working on these projects. And I also think in this downtown, we're going to have to take some calculated risk. And to me, this is one of those calculated risks, spending some money on a consultant. And as long as our staff works diligently along with them, which I have no doubt that they will do, I'm comfortable spending the money.
Mr. McIlroy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just for the sake of clarity, from my point of view on the Finance Committee, when I was speaking about the position that was being proposed by staff and the ultimate recommendation that came back, which was for the $35,000 for the consultation, I think Mr. Burns is doing a pretty good job of explaining the potential that's there to do something with a consultant, but it certainly wasn't my intention that we were defining the consultant at that level. I felt a little uncomfortable moving forward from a staff point of view, defining money to be spent by staff for economic development when we really haven't even decided from a policy point of view what it is we're asking staff to do. So I think the compromise at the committee level was to make some funds available in the event, as a council, we come up with a policy on how we'd like to move forward with economic development, where it be specific to downtown or west, east, whatever it is. I think that was my understanding of what the conversation and the recommendation that came out of the committee level. And while I certainly understand and appreciate what Mr. Diaz is saying, I would be more in line with supporting, as Mr. Yers has said, some monies be available if this year we can get something together from a policy point of view as a city, how we want to see economic development happen. So I would not be in support of the amendment, the first part of the amendment that Mr. Diaz had mentioned.
Thank you, Mr. McIlroy. Ms. Reiki?
Could this year potentially be used to write the policy? And would that take any extra funds? Or I know it would take staff time, so would that need to be compensated with the extra funds?
Mr. Burns, you want to respond to that?
I think to answer the question, I don't think that it would take any additional funds. Certainly, if existing staff are working with the council on discussing and trying to define policy objectives, I think that I guess my thought is that having the dollars available would give us the resources to pull in an additional outside consultant, perhaps an expert in this area who could help facilitate that process and then work to help implement what comes out of that. If we don't have that, certainly we can continue to work between the council and a staff level with the time and resources that we have available. And if that completely answers your question, I guess we can do what we can with what we have for resources and as we're directed by the council.
I think, Mr. Burns, you've responded pretty well, and we've heard a lot of good comments this evening. I just wanted to mention that initially I had gone to Bill and said that I think it's time that we consider a full-time position for the city. I think it's important with all the activities that are going on that when the public or when business or whoever, when they're looking at expanding or coming into Verona, I think it's important that they know that they're talking to someone who is responsible and works under the direction of the city council. So it was for that reason that we went in and we talked about adding position. I think there was a little bit of not complete, comfort in moving forward with a full-time position this year, and the compromise certainly was to go with a consulting firm, but it would give us some time. It would put the dollars in the budget so that we could flesh out throughout this year how we're going to move forward. But I think that the goal still is that at some point that we have a full-time person that works for the city who works in that area. So I would be against the amendment as well, and if we put the money in the budget, then we can work and Bill can come back and Adam can come back to us and say, this is what we really think that we need to do. So I think it's important that the money is there for the position and we can all work together to try and get what we want to accomplish there. I mean, we're talking about, what is it, Bill, $1.5 million just in the downtown as far as for improvements in the downtown. And that's a huge investment. And people in the city have talked to me about that. They want to see improvements in the downtown. But when you start talking $1.5 million, we really need to know what we're doing with that money, because that is just talking about improvements. It doesn't talk about bringing any new business or buying buildings or doing any of those types of things. So I think we need help. And whether it's a consulting firm or a consultant, or whether it's a full-time position with the city, we need to move in that direction if we want to be serious. And people need to know that they're talking to the city when they're looking at coming here and locating here. So those are my thoughts. Mr. Diaz?
I guess one comment and a question, I guess I'd like to ask for roll call votes and if the amendments could be considered separately. And I just had a general comment. I actually think the idea of adding a staff eventually for economic development is a good idea. Like I said, it's just the fact that it's a consultant. I just don't think this is the kind of thing that should be handled by a consultant. And in the future, maybe even in the next budget, I would definitely be supportive of adding a position to handle that. Because I do agree that we need to take care of our downtown and to take care of all the money we're investing in it. Because you don't want to invest all this money and then kind of lose track of it because nobody's watching it. So I totally understand that.
Mr. Linder?
I guess I just wanted to take a step back and talk about the budget in general. Being on a finance committee, my initial thought was it was a pretty big increase, even though it was -1 mill rate to overall change to the people of Verona. But as I've been working on and thinking about it, I like it more and more. It does a lot of things with that, building the infrastructure in the city, and also getting a lot of people in key spots. Replacement fund, it's doing a lot to that. We're solving a problem with the senior center with their HVAC and slippery floors. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. So I'm stuck on the -1%. I think I'd have real trouble trying to increase that at all. And I'm really interested in the economic development type situation. Everybody keeps talking about it as a consultant. I don't know, I guess I'm not really thinking of it as a consultant that just tells you what to do and walks away. I'm looking at, I guess I envision it more as somebody who's going to go out there and find business for the Verona and say, be advocate for Verona. That's my vision. Somebody else can speak to theirs, but that's how I look. I don't look as a consultant just to tell us what we need to do. So those are my thoughts on the budget.
Jack, I would agree with your last comments about what the consultant should do. And I think, having said that, it's very difficult to measure the success, whether it's a consultant that would do that or whether it's even a full-time position with the city. And those things don't just happen overnight. So I'm glad that I'm hearing that there's support, maybe not right now, but at least for that position, because I think it's important that at some point that the city have that and that there's some continuity when we're talking about economic development. Mr. McGilvray?
Thank you. And just to piggyback on what Jack's saying, and that's certainly how I was looking at it when we were talking at the committee level, but on a much bigger picture, I think I agree that I'd like to see us do some things for the downtown, but on a bigger picture, I think economic development, we should be looking at it as the city of Verona, not just simply what we do downtown. What we do on the bigger picture will support what we're proposing to do downtown. I mean, the tax base we can create helps us with things like TIF improvements in our downtown, or whatever financial tools we decide we can put into place to make growth happen, or help induce growth in our downtown, promote that. Those are the things we have to look at in a bigger picture. So I would hope whatever we do, I don't particularly like the idea of a consultant. I think it's, for me, it's more selling, as Jack's saying, selling Verona as a whole. And if we can find the right personality short term, and maybe it's a full-time staff person, but until we define what it is, what we want to do, we're kind of setting up whoever this person is. If it's a full-time staff person, I don't ever want to put them in a position where we're not allowing them to succeed because we haven't defined what our end goal is. So that was my primary reason for holding back on creating this full-time staff person right now, because until we decide what it is we want them to do, it's really not fair to put somebody in a position and say, here, make this happen. We don't know what this is just yet, so.
Right. And just to clarify, in the conversations that we've had so far, I don't think I heard anyone say that this person, whether they were full-time or a consultant, would work solely in the downtown. I think the intent is that it's for the entire city. So I don't think it's just the downtown. Ms. Doyle?
And another key component that I think came out a lot during finance was it's not only getting new businesses here in Verona, but it's also business retention. And how can we expand and help the businesses here that are already in Verona expand and be as successful as possible. So I think that's an important idea to include as well. And I do agree with the comments made from the other finance committee members about it not truly being a consultant, because we did discuss at a bit of detail about how important it was for continuity and relationship building as a part of this position. So I think we all know that this is a very important step to take forward to make sure that we're allocating those dollars to make an investment in the businesses in our community and also take some of the tax burden off of residents in the future.
Other comments on any of the amendments? Mr. Diaz?
I think I'm in order here, but I would like to propose an amendment to the staff amendment. I would like to propose that we redirect the money towards offsetting borrowing for the street, mill, and overlay program.
That is a recommendation, or you'll make that as a motion later? Or?
That's what I'm asking you. I would like to make a motion to amend the amendment.
Before you make the motion, Bill, how do you want us to do this tonight? What do you think makes the most sense? Do we, again, operate under consensus and we have a show of hands, so there's the roll call, or do we take actual votes on the amendments? What do you think would be best?
Yeah, I think from a staff perspective, we would hope to come out of tonight with a clear understanding of what is supported to be included in the budget so we can have everything prepared for next week. I think that could be done by motions and action on individual amendments. That might be the clearest.
Okay, we'll plan on a motion then. Mr. Diaz, so
I should make a motion then?
an amendment to the staff.
Okay. I move that we amend the staff amendment to redirect the money to offset borrowing for the street, mill, and overlay program.
Actually, if we could, we don't actually have a motion on any of the amendments yet. So prior to making an amendment, we should probably have, so since you're the author, Oh, you're talking to staff, okay. Do we have anyone who wants to make the motion on the staff amendment? Mr. Touche?
I would like to make a motion to include the staff the staff recommended budget amendment by reducing, and I've been trying to pull up the document the whole time, by reducing our personnel budget by $10,116.
We have a motion by Mr. Touche. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Yurs. And now we have, go ahead, Mr. McGilvray.
Just asking Mr. Burns if the language for is personnel budget, you've actually got it listed as administration budget. Does it need to be, are the two separated?
It's the administration, it's the personnel section within the administration
Okay,
budget.
just
I
wanted to make
believe
sure
that's
we were
the understanding.
clear.
And I would just suggest too, if we could, that we'd make this conditional on the anticipated benefit level coming in as we believe, and like I said, we would attempt to confirm that prior to next Monday.
Mr. Touche and Mr. Yurs, is that acceptable to you, that contingency? Okay, Mr. Diaz.
Okay, good. I would like to make a motion to amend the amendment to, instead of redirecting the money from reducing 2015 expenditures, to redirect it to offset borrowing for the street mill and overlay program.
We have a motion by Mr. Diaz. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a second by Mr. Linder. We're open discussion on the amendment. Mr. Diaz?
Just one quick thing. It, you know, for every $10,000 we borrow, we're going to pay more than that back with interest. So I just think any kind of little bit we can not borrow. Future councils, well, maybe they won't thank us, but we'll be helping future councils in the city long term.
Mr. McGilvray?
Just a question for Mr. Burns. What was the intent of staff and where was did you have a line that you were particularly interested in replacing that $10,000 with?
There wasn't a proposal to spend the dollars elsewhere. It's just we had a updated information that there's an expense that we had in the budget that we feel we likely will not have, so that would be an opportunity to reduce that expense. As written up in the amendment, if we just reduce the expense, that would be a reduction in the levy that would be required, but we did not propose applying it elsewhere.
Does the staff have a feeling one way or the other?
I personally do not. We wanted to make the updated information
Okay.
available to the council.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Doyle?
Just another question, Mr. Burns. So would that have added a reduction of 1.1% abouts then? So without this, we would still be at the 1%. It wouldn't affect that in any way, since this is money that we wouldn't have had to begin with, or wouldn't have been included to begin with?
Yeah, the recommended budget is projected to have a 1% decrease, so if you would reduce it further, yeah, it'd be approximately 1.1%. So with applying this elsewhere, we should still be at approximately 1%.
Other questions or comments? Otherwise, and I didn't know that Mr. Diaz would be making this amendment to the amendment. My thought is none of us like to see debt, but we have worked through a process where myself and Bill and Cindy have worked on the budget. There was a recommended budget to the council, to the finance committee, excuse me. We came out of the finance committee, I believe it was unanimous with that, and not that changes can't be made. But what we're talking about here in total dollars is peanuts compared to what we're talking to. And I think that everyone should remember that we have a plan in place. We've had a plan in place for several years, and it will really be impacted on the diffusing of the EPIC TIF. And that's really where we're going to be able to handle the debt. So I would say that if we're going to make these types of decisions, which are very, very, very minor on the debt, then I would ask that you would do the same thing when we look at other larger projects for debt, because we're talking about some very, very big dollars. So, you know, I asked staff, I said, how do you feel about this? And the response that I got back was not specific to this amendment, because I didn't know that this amendment would be made, But I was told that the preference of the staff was that we went with the budget that was recommended by the Finance Committee. So I would encourage you that you would not support the amendment, and that we leave it as recommended by the staff. So it reduces, and if we talk about increasing the levy, if we talk about increasing the tax levy, the total, that increases the base, and that's moving forward for every year. And I can tell you, just last week, I was down at the senior center again, and they're begging for us not to raise taxes any more than we possibly have to. So I would recommend that we support the amendment, but not the amendment to the amendment. People are looking for us to lower their taxes, and they've been talking about that it's coming for a long time. And when I tell people that, we're looking at, the Epic TIF and that real impact happening in 2 years, people want to see something sooner. So I would encourage you to vote against the amendments. Questions, comments? Ms. Doyle?
So just for clarification, your statements were just about the 3 amendments in general, not the specific amendment to the amendment, because the amendment to the amendment would decrease the tax rate. Although slightly, it would decrease the tax rate, correct?
It would decrease the borrowing, and was that borrowing for the capital or for the?
No, this was the administrative
The
personnel.
administrative,
Yeah,
right. For the capital.
okay.
Okay. Mr. Diaz?
Yeah, I know these are kind of small changes, and some of it could potentially take on the sort of more of a symbolic thing than anything. But I think, looking at the Epic TIF, a lot of the stuff that'll come on the property roll from the Epic TIF is already spoken for through debt. And I just feel like, well, I'm just going to quote Bill Burns here from an email. It says, in general, if the city has available funds, it is financially beneficial in the long run to borrow less to avoid interest costs. If we are borrowing money, we are obligating future taxpayers to pay the borrowed money and the interest. And this doesn't solve all of our problems. And it's, to me, it's just getting us on the right path where we just are not borrowing so much money. And I understand why the TIF for Epic is staying open. I don't like it, but there's perfectly good reasons to keep it open to make sure the project gets done right. But that being said, we can't just assume everything's going to go our way. And I just think that long-term fiscally, borrowing less money is the better thing to do. So, and people are still going to get a tax decrease, no matter what happens, whether these amendments get passed or not. They're still going to get a tax decrease, which I think is really good. So,
Mr. Touche?
Luke, I appreciate your counter argument. I consider the mayor's argument very convincing, and the part that really caught my attention was this impacts future taxes. We reduce it by 1%, 1.1%. That sets the mill rate for the year going ahead and our future going ahead. And we talk about the city borrowing money, but it's also the taxpayers paying money. And if the more we reduce taxes today, reduces how much we as property owners will pay in the future. And to me, that's important. I mean, that's just as much as that. It may only add up to $10 in my pocket. I don't know what that dollar amount is. I haven't asked what it is, but on an individual level, it may not sound like much, but it builds and it adds and it keeps building. And I think as a city, I think we can possibly ask Public Works to figure out how to spend a little bit less, this $11,000, to make up that difference. I think there's other ways we can attack how much we borrow in capital, but to me, it's really important to stop the trend of constantly increasing taxes, because that's my future. That's our residents' future that we're impacting, and that's my biggest consideration right now.
Additional comments, Mr. McGilvray?
I guess the other thing I would mention is, I think Jack alluded to this. This is a pretty significant growth in the budget we have this year. Now, that's because we are very fortunate. We live in a community that has seen growth where other communities have shrunk. We've been fortunate on a lot of fronts because of that financially. And I think to the mayor's point, and a little bit to Evan's point, and even to yours, I mean, people expect to see something for all that growth. And I think one of the hardest things I had going through the budgeting process was the idea that we had seen this great amount of growth and we still are only going to be able to reduce taxes by 1%. Part of that is because we've kind of worked through a system where we've put things off for as long as we could until we were in a better position financially. Today we're in that position financially. But I really, 1% was hard for me to take. When you start shaving off 1%, people start looking at you like, oh, seriously? You couldn't even do 1%? And I totally understand what you're saying, Luke. But to the mayor's point, we do have a plan in place, and when our TIFs to fees, we've been very good about applying those plans over the years, and I would hope moving forward, that's exactly what future council will do. So as much as I appreciate your sentiment and the reason why you're doing it, I can't support it just from a symbolic point of view. It just doesn't work for me. I really want the taxpayers to have a bigger tax break than they're getting right now. And I recognize that the city needs to do the things we're doing in order for us to continue to have the quality of life we do. So I can't support either one of them, but it's not because I don't think your point is valid.
Other comments? I think, Mr. Burns, if you would, just so that we clarify what would be the impact of the amendment. So, just thinking out loud here, if we were to pass the amendment as recommended by staff, it would reduce the city tax levy by what dollar amount? 10,000 something?
$10,116.
So it would impact the levy, and therefore it would lessen the base for moving forward. If we were to pass the amendment, as recommended by Mr. Diaz, it would reduce the amount of borrowing by that same amount. Correct? Is that the impact? I just want to make sure we have the correct impact of the amendment.
Yeah, my understanding of the motion with the amendment would be that compared to the recommended budget, the property tax levy would stay the same.
Right.
The operating levy would be reduced by the 10,116. The capital levy would increase by the 10,116, and those would be funds available to offset our borrowing, so we could borrow less in 2015.
And if the staff recommended amendment went through, we'd actually be reducing the levy and the base.
Correct. If that weren't applied towards the capital levy, it would reduce that expenditure, and it would also reduce the levy by the 10,116.
Okay, I just want to make sure that everyone understands the impact of the amendment. Other thoughts, other comments? Mr. McGilvray?
So just for clarification, I think, and I believe that was Ms. Doyle's point, was you'd go from a 1% reduction to a 1.8, 1.9, or 1.0.
Probably approximately a 1.1.
Right.
Okay.
Questions, comments? If not, we have the amendment before us, Mr. Diaz's amendment to the amendment. And Mr. Diaz has asked for a roll call vote. So, Bill, if you would read the roll on that, please.
Alderperson Linder?
Aye.
Alderperson Yours?
Aye.
Alderperson Touche? No. Alderperson Reekie?
Aye.
Alderperson McGilvery?
Aye.
Alderperson Doyle?
Aye.
Alderperson Diaz?
Aye.
Alderperson Steiner?
Aye.
And that amendment passes. Anything else on the on this amendment, on the staff amendment? If not, we could vote then on the amendment as amended. Mr. Burns, would you read the roll, please?
Just for clarification,
Yes, Mr. Linder?
this is the amendment that Mr. Diaz proposed, not the staff one at this time. Which,
What we
Does the
voted
staff-
on first was the amendment was Mr. Diaz's amendment.
okay, all right.
So
That's
this-
what I thought, and I saw some votes, and I was like, I'm not so sure.
So no, now we're on the amendment, the staff amendment as amended by Mr. Diaz.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Mr. Burns, if you would.
Alderperson Linder?
Aye.
Alderperson Yours?
Aye.
Alderperson Touche? Alderperson Reekie?
Aye.
Alderperson McGilvery?
Aye.
Alderperson Doyle?
Aye.
Alderperson Diaz?
Aye.
Alderperson Steiner?
Aye.
and that passes 8-0. Okay? Do we have any motions on the other two amendments? Mr. Diaz?
You're just asking me to move to consider my amendments?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. I move that we remove the $35,000 in professional services to contract for economic development services and put that money towards offsetting borrowing for the mill and overlay program in 2015.
We have a motion by Mr. Diaz. Is there a second?
For the sake of discussion, I will make a second.
Mr. McGilvery seconds. Mr. Diaz? Any additional comments?
I just wanted to ask staff, how much do we pay for debt service in this budget, and what percentage I know this was in an email, but I'm kind of blanking on it right now. What percentage are we at our allowable limit of debt for the city?
Bill, was it in your PowerPoint? I think Cindy said we're at 52% of the city's policy, which is more stringent than the state's policy. 39.6 of the state.
Thank you.
Comments on this amendment? Ms. Reekie?
Thanks. I just kind of want to reiterate that I think we have really smart people on staff and even really in tune business people in our Chamber of Commerce that I think could do a good job of putting their heads together and drafting a policy for economic development for the whole city, not just downtown. And so I really think we should try to use this year to figure out that policy a little bit, define it better. And eventually, yeah, I'm totally in support of adding a full-time economic development city staff member. I'm not convinced that the job description is fleshed out enough to do it at this time.
Mr. Yurs?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Ms. Reekie to a certain extent, but I think these are things that can be done congruently. And we passed our downtown plan over a year ago, and I know I'm kind of harping on that, or maybe not a year, we're getting close to that, but I want to make sure that we move on some of these items, and I want to make sure that we don't lose that ability. And I fully agree that we have a hardworking staff, but back to Mr. Linder's point, having an advocate for the city, I think, is something that we've been lacking in an economic development role for a while. And that kind of gets at the mayor's point as well. I mean, we have dedicated staff who love the city and would promote it, but they just don't have the time in the day to be able to do all their other duties plus this on top of it. And I don't want to lose any time, and I want to make sure that we can move forward with what we decided we wanted to do a few years ago.
Additional, Mr. Diaz?
I answered my own question. I'm looking at the debt service, and it says in 2015, debt payments for principal and interest will total $6,919,783.
Other comments or questions? Ms. Reekie?
I just wanted to also say that I can see the writing on the wall. You know, I won't be disappointed if and when this amendment does not pass and that the budget goes forward as originally indicated. But and I think, you know, I also think that the city staff will do a great job of working with whomever is hired as sort of an economic development consultant, or, you know, whatever that ends up being. I have, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing what will happen with that too. I think good things can come from that. I'm not going to be completely disappointed.
Other comments on the amendment? Mr. Burns, would you speak to the impact of the amendment? An aye vote means this, and a no vote?
Yeah, so the amendment would reduce the expenditure budget and administration by $35,000, removing the funds for contracted economic development services, and would increase the capital levy by $35,000 to make funds available to reduce the potential borrowing level in 2015. So that the net impact of the amendment would be no change in the property tax levy compared to the recommended budget.
Okay, seeing no other questions, Mr. Burns, if you'd read the roll, please.
Alderperson Linder,
No.
Alderperson Yours,
No.
Alderperson Rieke, excuse me,
Aye.
Alderperson Touche, sorry. Alderperson McGilvery,
No.
Alderperson Doyle,
No.
Alderperson Diaz,
Aye.
Alderperson Steiner.
Nay.
And that motion, that amendment fails. Mr. Diaz?
Yeah, I would like to make a motion to change the proposed mill rate from $6.70 to $6.73 and use the additional proceeds to offset borrowing for the mill and overlay program in 2015.
We have a motion by Mr. Diaz. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Rieke. Mr. Diaz? I'm sorry, Ms. Doyle. Ms. Rieke, did you have your hand up? No. Any questions or comments on this motion? Ms. Doyle?
And I do appreciate Alder Diaz's intent with this motion to decrease the capital and what we're borrowing, which is what my broader point was with the last one, is if we can make a small impact on that for future taxpayers and for future budgets, I think that is important. But with this particular amendment, I just believe that when we do get into nitpicking this 1%, which I think was a great achievement to expand as many areas as we were able to when it comes to staffing and the needs of the city, that decreasing that 1% decrease in the tax rate just would be splicing hairs at this point, and I think would be a disservice to the taxpayers.
Other, Mr. Burns, please.
Yeah, if I could make a suggestion for the wording of the motion, since we set the levy and then the rate is a calculation, my suggestion would be that the amendment be to increase the levy by $45,000, which should have the impact of impacting the rate by about 3 cents, but rather than wording that in the motion that we're affecting the rate, because we're actually affecting the levy.
See Mr. Diaz nodding. Ms. Doyle as well? Okay. Other questions on the amendment? Mr. Burns, would you again please state the impact of a yes vote or a no vote?
Yeah, so the impact of this motion would be to increase the city's property tax levy by $45,000, increasing our capital levy and making those funds available to reduce the anticipated borrowing for 2015 on our street mill and overlay project.
Okay, seeing no other questions, Mr. Burns, if you'd read the roll, please.
Alderperson Linder,
No.
Alderperson Yours,
No.
Alderperson Touche, no. Alderperson Rieke,
No.
Alderperson McGilvery,
No.
Alderperson Doyle,
No.
Alderperson Diaz,
Aye.
Alderperson Steiner.
Nay.
And that motion fails as well. We didn't have any other amendments before us this evening. So a motion, Mr. Diaz?
If I could just make one general comment. I know I was the only person to propose amendments, but I did want to say I do like the budget overall, and I do think this is a pretty solid budget. And if nothing else, I hope I start a good conversation about the amount of debt that the city is borrowing, and that we need to. I've seen the plan. Plan looks good on paper. I just think we need to be mindful of the amount of money we're borrowing. But I do think the finance committee did a good job, and I think the budget as a whole is really good. So I just wanted to be clear that it's not like I had a huge problem with the budget as a whole.
Thank you, Mr. Diaz. And I think we'll have the opportunity next week, Monday as well, to talk about the budget. And I think after our budget's passed and other budgets in the area are passed, we'll be very proud of our budget. And I think we'll even be more proud of our budget in years to come because of some of the things that we can do and how responsible the city has been in the past. So I'm looking forward to many more years of responsible budgeting and us being able to be proud of our budgets moving forward and proud of our departments and proud of our city. So with that, no other business, a motion to adjourn would be in order. We have a motion by Mr. Yers. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Rieke. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.